5. Joseph as a prince in Egypt.
Joseph was wise in his service to Pharaoh, the age of 30. Joseph is exalted to rule Egypt. Genesis chapter 41 verses 38 through 46. 38. And the king said to them, "Nowhere will we find anyone smarter than this young man." 39 to 41. Therefore he said to Joseph, "God has made all this known to you, and that means that there is no one as wise and intelligent as you. Therefore, from now on you are in charge of my palace and all my people. Everyone in Egypt will have to obey you. Only I will have more power than you, because I am the king." 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. 43. And he asked him to accompany him in his chariot, as his governor. People shouted before Joseph, "Make way!" So the king put Joseph in charge of all his land. 44. Then he said to Joseph, "I am king of Egypt, but no one in this land will do anything without your permission." 45. The king also changed Joseph's name to Saphenath-paneah and gave him the daughter of Potiphera priest of On, whose name was Asenath, as his wife. After that, Joseph traveled throughout Egypt. 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he left the king and traveled throughout Egypt. His wisdom was shown in his administration. Joseph showed foresight during the years of abundance. Genesis chapter 41 verses 47 through 49. 47. During the 7 years of abundance, all Egypt produced very good crops. 48. So Joseph gathered up all the food produced in those 7 years and stored it up. In each city he stored up food from the fields around it. 49. Joseph stored up so much grain that it seemed as if he had gathered up all the sand on the seashore. He even stopped recording the amount of grain he had stored up, because it was no longer possible to keep track. Joseph showed shrewdness during the years of famine. Genesis chapter 41 verses 53 through 57, 53 to 54. Just as Joseph had said, after the 7 years of plenty, there were 7 years of famine. And there was famine in all the other countries, but there was food in Egypt. 55. When the famine began in Egypt, the Egyptians went to the king to ask for food. Then the king said to them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." 56. When there was no food left in the land, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. 57. So there was a famine that people from all over the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. And chapter 47 from 13 to 26, 13. But the people of Canaan and Egypt were consumed by famine. No food was found anywhere. 14. Yet Joseph sold grain and piled up money in the king's palace. All the money that was in those countries he collected in payment for the grain he had bought. 15. When the Egyptians also ran out of money, they all came to Joseph and said, "We have no money. Give us something to eat, or we will soon die." 16. Joseph replied, "If you have no money, bring me your cattle and I will give you grain in exchange." 17. The Egyptians brought him horses, sheep, goats, cattle and donkeys, and in exchange for them Joseph gave them food for a whole year. 18. But the next year they came to him and said, "Sir Governor, we cannot deny you that we have no money and that our animals are now yours. We have nothing to offer you in exchange for food except our land and ourselves. 19. Buy our land from us, and we will be slaves to the king. But give us food. Give us seed so that we can plant the land so that we will not die. We do not want you to see us die and our land become like a desert." 20. So the food shortage was so severe that all the Egyptians sold their fields to Joseph. 21. And Joseph bought them for the king of Egypt. So all the land in the land became the king's property, and everyone in Egypt became his servant. All this was Joseph's doing. 22. But Joseph did not buy the priests' land, because they did not put it up for sale. Because they always received help from the king, they had plenty of food. 23. Then Joseph said to the Egyptians, "Here is seed for you to sow your fields. But remember that today I have bought you and your land, and that they now belong to the king." 24. So when the harvest comes, you will give the king 1/5 of what you harvest, but you can keep the other 4/5 for yourself. From there you will set aside the seed you sow and food for yourselves and your children. 25. The Egyptians replied, "Sir Governor, you have saved our lives. Now give us the privilege of being the king's slaves. 26 Joseph made it a law in Egypt that a fifth of the crops would go to the king. And to this day this law has been respected. Only the lands of the priests did not become the king's. Joseph was aware of God's blessings. Genesis chapter 41 verses 50 through 52. 50 Before the lean years came, Asenath and Joseph had 2 sons. 51 Joseph named the first son Manasseh, because he said, God has made me forget all my troubles and my father's family. 52 He named his second son Ephraim, because he said, God has allowed me to have children in this country where I have suffered so much. Joseph was merciful in the way he treated his brothers, and he finally reunited with his brothers and his father. We find him in Genesis chapter 42. Joseph arranged for them to live in Goshen. Genesis chapter 47 verses 1 through 12. 1-2 Joseph chose 5 of his brothers and presented them to the king. He said to him, My father and my brothers have come from Canaan, and now they are in Goshen. They have come with their flocks and herds and all that they have. 3 The king asked them, What do you do? They replied, Your Majesty, we are shepherds, just as our ancestors were. For we have come to stay here for a while, because there is no food in Canaan, and we have no pasture for our flocks. Please let us live in Goshen. 5 The king said to Joseph, Since your father and your brothers have come to stay with you, 6 You may choose any place you like for them to live in this land. Give them the best land and let them live in Goshen. If any of them have any special skills, let them take care of my own flocks. 7 Then Joseph brought his father to the king. Jacob greeted him with great respect. 8 And the king asked him how old he was. 9 Jacob replied, Your Majesty, I have been on the move for 130 years. And although my life has not been easy, I have not yet lived like my grandfathers. 10 Finally, Jacob said goodbye to the king and left his presence. 11 Joseph did as the king ordered, giving his father and brothers the best land in Egypt. They settled in the region of Goshen, which later became known as the region of Ramesses. Joseph assured his brothers that he had forgiven them when Genesis chapter 45 verses 4 through 8 was first revealed to them. For then Joseph said to them, Come here. They approached, and then Joseph said to them, I am Joseph, the brother you sold to the Egyptians. 5-7 But do not worry, and do not reproach one another for anything. For 2 years now there has been no food in this entire region, and there are still 5 years left when no one will sow or harvest anything. But God sent me here before you to save you and your children in a wonderful way. 8 You see, it was not you who sent me here, but God who brought me. He has made me Lord and Master of all Egypt and an advisor to the king. Joseph assured his brothers that he had forgiven them when their father Jacob died. Genesis chapter 50 verses 15 through 21. 15 When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they thought, What if Joseph is still angry with us and wants to get even for what we did to him? 16-17 So they sent word to Joseph. Joseph, before our father died, he said, You must forgive us for all the harm we have done to you. We have done you great harm, but please forgive us. When Joseph heard this, he began to cry. 18 His brothers came to him and knelt before him. They said to him, We are your slaves. 19-21 But Joseph reassured them and said to them kindly, Do not be afraid, for I am not God. You wanted to harm me, but God changed everything for the best. You have already seen what has happened. God has spared many people. So do not be afraid. I will take care of you and your children. Joseph believes in God's providence. Joseph believed that despite all the negative things that had happened to him, God had a plan, and that is why he made everything work for good, to keep many people alive. Genesis chapter 50 verse 20 Do not be afraid, for I am not God. You wanted to harm me, but God changed everything for the better. You have already seen what has happened. Joseph believed that God would fulfill the promises he made to his people. Genesis chapter 50 verses 24 and 25. 24-25 Sometime later, Joseph said to his brothers, I am almost dead. But you can be sure that God will come to help you and will bring you back to the land that he promised under oath to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You, for your part, have to swear to me that you will take my remains from here when I die. In the life and history of Joseph, we see the value of a great character. A. Joseph focused on faith and trust in God. B. Joseph was a young man dedicated to serving God and man with honor and seriousness. C. Joseph was not deterred by the hatred, betrayal, and forgetfulness of others. D. Joseph was willing to forgive the mistakes made by others. E. Joseph was able to see the big picture, the wonderful works of God in the affairs of men. This noble character of Joseph can be useful in all times of life. A. As a young man, tempted and tested without the help of family or friends. B. As a mature individual, charged with important responsibilities. C. As an older person, knowing that death is imminent. May Joseph's character serve to inspire us to develop our character as well, that in some way we too can be an example for believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 12. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young. Instead, try to be an example for other Christians. Let everyone hear your way of speaking and see how you live, and let them try to be pure like you. Let everyone imitate your loving character and your trust in God. Summary of the emblematic story of Joseph in the Bible. Lessons of faith and forgiveness. The story of Joseph, one of the most emblematic characters in the Bible, is an exemplary lesson of faith and forgiveness. Told in the book of Genesis 37-50, his life was marked by hard trials but also by unexpected miracles. As a child, Joseph was the favorite of his father Jacob, something that caused discontent and jealousy in his brothers. One day, they decided to sell him as a slave without his father knowing, falsely claiming that he had been devoured by a wild beast. When he was sold to Potiphera, an officer of the Pharaoh of Egypt, young Joseph faced his new reality with faith and resilience. Despite his status as a slave, and being unjustly imprisoned later, he never let his spirit be broken. On the contrary, he showed an upright character and trusted in God in everything. And it was precisely his ability to interpret dreams that put him on the radar of the Pharaoh, who released him from prison and appointed him administrator of Egypt. During a long famine, Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain, and Joseph's brothers travel to Egypt in search of food. Genesis chapter 42 verses 1-4. Jacob, seeing that there was food in Egypt, said to his sons, "Why are you standing there looking? I have heard that there is food in Egypt. Go down there and buy from there for us, so that we may live and not die." Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, because he said, lest some disaster befall him. Why are they looking at each other? Jacob noticed a strange expression among the brothers when Egypt is mentioned, for the brothers knew that Joseph was likely sold into slavery there. Their conscience made them feel terrible every time Egypt was mentioned. The word Egypt must have rung in their ears, like the word rope in the house of a man who has hanged himself. Joseph's brothers had lived with this terrible secret for 20 years. It was never spoken of, but it never left them. Any mention of Joseph or Egypt brings out the feeling of guilt. They had to be freed from the power of this terrible secret, lest some disaster befall him. The impression we get of Jacob in this chapter is of a man who is bitter and pessimistic about everything. Because of this calamity, he believes that there will be another disaster on the way. Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin. Maintaining this attitude, he demanded that Benjamin stay with him. Even though he had 11 sons, only one was the son of his beloved wife Rachel, and Jacob felt he had to protect him. However, if Jacob only knew, if only he could trust in the hand of God, which he could not see. In fact, the only reason there are provisions in Egypt to meet their needs is because God sent Joseph ahead. God knew what he was doing. Hunger is not a good thing, but God used it. God can and does use the necessary material that is needed in our lives to get us to do things we normally would not do. Normally, the brothers would never go to Egypt, but necessity brought them to Egypt. Jacob's sons bowed down before Joseph. Genesis chapter 42 verses 5 and 6. The sons of Israel were among those who went to buy, because there was famine in the land of Canaan. Joseph was the lord of the land, who sold wheat to everyone. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. They bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. They knew that in this time of famine, their lives literally depended on this Egyptian official. Therefore, they showed great respect by bowing with their faces to the ground. Obviously, this reminds Joseph of the dream he had about 20 years earlier, in which his brothers bowed down to him. Genesis chapter 37 verses 5 through 8. When Joseph's brothers plotted to murder him and sell him into slavery, specifically what they were doing was trying to defeat his dreams. Genesis chapter 37 verses 19, 20. Instead, they sent Joseph to Egypt. They provided the way for the dreams to come true. The great and glorious truth of God's providence is that He makes use of man's evil actions toward us to accomplish His good plan. Man's wickedness is inexcusable, but if it means that God's wisdom and goodness are greater than man's wickedness, Edom's fury becomes your praise. Psalm 76:10. Joseph questions his brothers and puts them in jail. Genesis chapter 42 verses 7 through 17. Joseph recognized his brothers as soon as he saw them, but he acted as if he did not know them, and spoke harshly to them and said, "Where have you come from?" They replied, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams he had had about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the undefended parts of the country." "No, our lord," they replied. "But your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of the same father, and we are honorable men. Your servants were never spies." But Joseph said to them, "No, to see the undefended regions of the country you have come." "We your servants are 12 brothers," they answered, "sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is with our father today, and the other has disappeared." And Joseph said to them, "That is what I said to you when I said that you are spies. In this you will be tested. As Pharaoh lives, you will not go out from here until your youngest brother comes. Send one of you to bring your brother, and yourselves be bound. Your words will be tested, whether there is truth in you, and if not, as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." Then he put them together in prison for 3 days. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but acted like a stranger. Joseph, speaking through an interpreter, does not yet want to reveal that he speaks Hebrew. He did not reveal his identity to his brothers, but treated them harshly. Then Joseph remembered the dreams he had had about them. Joseph was not playing with his brothers. Some commentators believe that if it had been up to Joseph, he would have revealed himself to his brothers right then and there. But God recalled the dreams to his mind and led him to be an instrument for the brothers' correction and restoration. Sometimes God can and should use ways that we think are too harsh to call us to be where He wants us to be. We must never resist, because it is the hardness of our hearts that demands it. "Before I was afflicted I erred, but now I keep your word." Psalm 119 verse 67. The other has disappeared. This is a lie, and the brothers knew it. They had every reason to believe that Joseph was not dead, but living a horrible life in slavery. Perhaps they had repeated the lie to themselves so often that they came to believe it. Joseph gives terms for their release from prison. Genesis chapter 42 verses 18 to 20. On the third day Joseph said to them, "Do this and live. I fear God. If you are honest men, one of your brothers will stay in prison, while the rest of you go and bring food to remedy the hunger of your family. But you will bring your youngest brother, then your words will be verified and you will not die." They did so. Do this and live. After 3 days in an Egyptian prison, the brothers were willing to go along with whatever Joseph wanted them to do. This was good, because Joseph was clearly in control. I fear God. Joseph did not want his brothers to be afraid of him as much as he wanted them to trust him. If the brothers were wise enough to consider what this really meant, it would have been a great comfort to them. If they are honest men, Joseph's demand was obvious. They had to prove that they were not spies, proving that they were honest and that they told him the truth about their brother who was at home. The brothers agreed and did so, but only reluctantly, because they knew that their father would never want to be separated from Benjamin. The guilt on the conscience of Joseph's brothers worked. Genesis chapter 42 verses 21 through 24. But they said to one another, "Truly we have sinned against our brother, For we saw the anguish of his soul when he begged us, and we would not listen. Therefore this anguish has come upon us. Then Reuben answered them, saying, Did I not speak to you and say, Do not sin against the lad? But you would not listen to me, therefore his blood is now required of us. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for he had an interpreter to speak to them. Then Joseph went away from them and wept. When he came to them, he spoke to them, and took Simeon from among them and seized him in his presence. We are truly guilty against our brother. They thought that this disaster was upon them because of the way they had treated Joseph, and their conscience pricked them. This was a good sign. The speed with which they associated these events with their sin against Joseph probably meant that they often remembered their sin against him. He turned away from them and wept. Joseph was overcome with emotion as he saw and understood this work of God in the conscience of his brothers. God had to do a deep work in the hearts of these brothers for the relationship to be reconciled. Not recognizing their brother, now in a position of power, they ended up prostrating themselves before him, thus fulfilling the dream that Joseph had as a child. Instead of seeking revenge, Joseph opted for forgiveness, revealing his true identity to them and helping them during the famine. There could be no quick and easy, Joseph, in this situation. God guided events so that the brothers saw their sin clearly and fully repented before Joseph revealed himself and the relationship was restored. However, even before the restoration, Joseph would not give way to bitterness and hatred. He still loves his brothers and wants to be with them. He returned to them again and conversed with them. He took Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Joseph left Simeon held prisoner to ensure the brothers' return. Simeon was not mentioned as having a prominent role in Joseph's sale, as were Reuben and Judah. Jacob's sons returned to Canaan and find their money back. Genesis chapter 42 verses 25 through 28. Afterward Joseph commanded them to fill their sacks with grain and to restore the money to each of them, putting it in his sack, and to give them food for the journey. So it was done to them. Then they put their grain on their donkeys and went away from there. But when one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey at the inn, he saw the money that was in the mouth of his sack. And he said to his brothers, My money has been returned to me. Here it is, in my sack. Then their hearts were troubled, and they said to each other, What is this that God has done to us? Their hearts were troubled and they were afraid. They were terrified because they were already suspected as spies. Now they could also be accused of being thieves. What is this that God has done to us? The guilt in the conscience of the brothers was working hard, with all the adversities back to God. They returned to Jacob and tell him the story. Genesis chapter 42 verses 29 through 35. When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, The man, the lord of the land, spoke harshly to us and treated us as if we were spies for the land. But we said to him, We are honest men, we were never spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One has disappeared, and the youngest is today with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the lord of the land, said to us, By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, take some to relieve the famine in your households, and go, bring your youngest brother to me. Then I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade freely throughout the land. It happened that as they emptied their sacks, they saw that in each man's sack was the bag with his money, and both they and their father, seeing the bags with the money, were afraid. We are honest men. The same brothers lied to their father 20 years ago, saying that Joseph was killed by a wild animal when they sold him to slave traders. One has disappeared. The brothers again repeated the lie, and it will be dramatically proven that they are wrong, because no lie or deception is right, no matter how well arranged it is. May God have mercy on us,